Thanks. I've spent the last 25 years also working on putting automation in vehicles, and where I work, this is our vehicle here. It's much like this. It has tires, but also wings. What has happened over the last 25 years is we have transitioned from this totally manual vehicle here to a mostly automated one. And if you flew here today, or yesterday, in an airplane, you most certainly flew on the highly automated version of the airplane because there is nothing left at this point. So over the last 25 years, we've learned many lessons about what happens when you take an ordinary vehicle like this and fill it with automation, and I want to talk about that today. So what I'll do, I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about how to operate the old kind of vehicle here, which is this. As you see, it takes 3 people to operate this. We have a pilot, and then we have someone to tune the navigation radios and someone to talk to air traffic control. And here in the back seat, where the roll of tape is, we have what we call the system engineer. We call him the plumber, der Klempner in German. That person sits back there. Okay, before you get in the vehicle, you've got to bring all this stuff, a lot of paperwork, charts, operating manuals, everything. Everything has to be calculated by hand. And you must choose your route every step of the way, calculate the distances, the speeds you will fly. Even when you take off, you have to decide what should be the power setting to get the airplane off the ground, which you must take into consideration the outside air temperature, the elevation of the airport, how much the airplane weighs, everything, all has to be done by hand. When you're actually flying, again, like I said, it takes 3 people. One person will operate the controls, another one will talk on the radio and maybe tune navigation radios, and then the last person will monitor the systems of the airplane and let you know if anything should go astray. And if that were not enough, you also have the job of avoiding other airplanes like we have. We don't want the situation on the left to happen, so you must constantly be monitoring around you, and also, of course, to avoid mountains like we have in Switzerland and Alaska and Colorado. All part of the job. That airplane is gone. Today, as recently as 10, 15 years ago, we have almost nothing but this sort of aircraft right here. And as you can see, the plumber, the engineer, is gone. There are just 2 pilots. And literally everything that I've just described has been replaced by technology. So the charts that we used to carry with all the, well, this is what it is today. It's an iPad. When you want to calculate the route, there's no need to actually do any calculation. You do a little typing into the flight management computer here. You press return, and it all happens. It searches the databases of the airplane and calculates your speeds, times of arrival, everything. When it's time to go fly, again, you push a button. You engage the autopilot up here. The autopilot will automatically follow the route that's been calculated by the computer, and it'll show you its progress along the way. If something should happen to one of the airplane's systems, a message will come up, not only describing the nature of the problem, but also what to do to fix it, right there. Avoiding other airplanes, we have a system for that. If 2 airplanes should come in proximity, it is automatically detected. One airplane is told to climb, and the other one's told to descend. Fixed. Should there be any terrain, mountains in the area, you will see that on the map display just in front of you. So the big question, how has this affected safety? So as you can see, this is the accident rate in the upper graph. You can see what has happened. Every year, fewer accidents. As we have more automation, fewer and fewer accidents. In the bottom graph there, we can see that during the time that we still had some older airplanes and some newer airplanes operating at the same time, you get a more detailed breakdown. Looking at the older airplanes, given that there were 20% of them, we would have expected about 4 accidents of the 18 accidents that happened. Instead, we saw 8, twice the rate. Among the highly automated airplanes, given that they are half of the fleet, we would have expected 9 accidents, but we've only seen 3. Pretty clear trend there. More automation, fewer accidents. Now, let's look at this. If we look at the kinds of accidents, mechanical problems over the last 50 years have not changed. Things still break. No changes there. But we look at the bottom, we look at which proportion of accidents happens because people made a mistake. And you can see it has not changed at all. That all the technology that we designed to replace humans and do things for them, we have still not eliminated or even reduced the incidence of human error. For every human error we have gotten rid of, we have invented a new one. Let me have a drink and we'll... So I'm going to ask the question, are we ready for this in cars? I'll tell you what specifically has happened in aviation, and you can tell me, you can answer the question at the end. The first thing we got in airplanes, of course, was the autopilot, the thing that allowed you to push the button and sit on your hands. In this picture, the pilots are in the back talking about something else, and the plane is flying itself. Today, we have adaptive cruise control and lane keeping, something somewhat similar to this. What happened when we introduced the autopilot? Pilots started talking, just like the people in the car are talking. Our pilots started talking too. And we had accidents as a result of it. They were so commonplace that in 1981, we had to introduce a special rule called the sterile cockpit. No talking below 10,000 feet until you're up in the air. If you say anything, it must be related to the flight. Just after that rule came out, we had this. This is a crew sitting on the ramp, ready for takeoff, talking, no, joking about, let's talk about something else. Let's put something funny on the flight recorder just in case we would crash. 1 minute and 30 seconds later, that. Okay. So you think we would learn the lesson after that? Apparently not. We have Northwest Flight 188. That's the one where they overflew the airport, remember, about 5-6 years ago. Pilots became distracted and just entirely missed the airport. Continental Connection took off on the wrong runway, a short runway, didn't make it. Everyone but the one pilot was killed. We still have the problem with talking. We tried to stop talking. We talked about talking. We talked about trying to stop talking, and it still goes on. Much talk about texting and driving, talking and driving. Guess what? Pilots now do it too. Yes. The picture on the bottom right is the outcome of a flight in which a pilot was talking on their phone while operating a helicopter. So, right, people are looking at, what is the essence of this problem? And one thing that we find is that people truly believe that they can do two things at once, that they can drive the car, they can fly the plane while talking at the same time. It's just not a problem. I was born to multitask. I can do two things at once, and of course they're wrong. But their belief in their ability to do so is unshakable. Something I look at myself, what we call mind wandering. This is the problem of just thinking about something else when you probably should be thinking about the thing in front of you. I would say some proportion of you are mind wandering right now, and I don't blame you. So we look at it in cars. We find that on an open road, when asked, drivers report that they're mind wandering maybe up to 2/3 of the time on a straight road, that they're thinking about driving 1/3 of the time and thinking about something else 2/3 of the time. Airline pilots, no different. We find that the pilot operating controls maybe 1/3 of the time, and the pilot who is monitoring that pilot maybe half of the time. I have a study that I could share with that data. So we ask, like the talking, is there anything we can do about distraction? We're talking about it. There are people who do study the effects of meditation. We've shown some advantages there, that if you meditate for 30 to 60 minutes and then have to perform some task in which you must pay attention, you do much better. It's hard to require all of the pilots to meditate before the flight, though. Yeah. Okay, another thing is maybe we can design systems that help manage our attention. There is a group at the US National Transportation Safety Board who is looking at this, that if we can't pay attention all the time, maybe there are certain times where it's a very good idea to pay attention and just highlight those. So maybe on a display that shows our progress, we'll have some kind of a circle. That if you're going to talk on your phone, if you're going to think about something else, if you are going to do something other than pay attention, this would be a very bad time to do that. Inside the circle, you pay attention. Take your nap outside the circle. Maybe that's possible to do that, and maybe we can implement something like that in cars, where the circles around the cars, when they're in close proximity or they're touching each other, this is a good time to pay attention. When their circles are far apart, maybe you can take a break. We've tried using alerts and alarms, and we've had many, many problems with those. You consider the case where the driver is distracted and all of a sudden the car needs the attention of the driver, so it makes a beep, and then you pay attention then. Well, that has not worked out for us. What we have is that now people use the beeps, the alerts and alarms as the primary means of monitoring. That they don't watch their altitude or where they are. They just listen for the alert. That's my thing. Instead of monitoring altitude, I'm now a beep monitor. I just listen for noises. And then when the noise happens, then I go back to doing my job. The really rotten problem, we've seen many in aviation, that people did not pay attention to their altitude, which was set to capture, and they went through that altitude, the alarm did not sound, and they just kept going. And then air traffic control calls and says, what's going on? Like, oh, our alert was not, and they would explain, it's not your job to listen for an alert, it is your job to pay attention to where you are. And like, oh, that was a problem for us. Also, we have huge problem in aviation, what we call the cry wolf effect, when an alarm goes off, but there's really nothing to pay attention to. This happens all the time, especially with traffic in the airplanes. We have the system that alerts you to other airplanes. It just yells, traffic, traffic. And people just plug their ears because so often the alert is nothing to pay attention to. Reaction times, the other big difference between aviation and cars is we have lots of time to react. We're 8 miles in the air, nothing is going to happen. We're trained that if something bad happens, the first step is to take a deep breath, maybe a sip of coffee, stretch a little bit, loosen up the legs, and then go to the problem. But we're in a car, it's like that. So in a lot of ways, we have it very, very easy in aviation. We are also looking at this problem, the problem of, let's say you've been doing something else, the alarm sounds, your attention is needed. You now go from passenger to driver, and your first step is to figure out what's going on. We call that rapid onboarding, and it's something that we're all pretty good at, and people study this, the problem of walking up to a conversation that's already happening. You see people talking over there, you're standing here, you walk up and you listen. How long does it take you to say something interesting or funny or meaningful? We're not too bad at this. So we're studying that and looking how we might tune those skills to improve our role in especially a sort of level 3 or level 4 car where we were just very occasionally needed and called upon. How do we join the conversation, the automobile conversation quickly? Let's see. Yeah, the question we talked about at the table last night. Sometimes the situations that you are confronted with are very complex. So we talked about hearing a beep go off. You look up, you see a chair in the middle of the road. And so what do you do? Well, I immediately swerve to avoid the chair. But what if there's something more valuable in the other lane or beside that? Maybe the best thing would be to hit the chair and not hit the person. It's a very complex situation. And when you look up in a second, it's really hard to get all of the facts and understand everything that's going on around you and make that call. And I wonder how complex that could be. In aviation, things can get pretty complex, where you might need 5 minutes to really get the entire situation in your head and decide what to do. Takeover skills. We do this in aviation. After long periods of automation, I do studies in which I present pilots with something dramatic and quick and critical. And I'll tell you, the outcomes are not good. Even among pilots who practice this every year, sometimes 2 times a year in a simulator, we still have problems. It's just not enough. And part of the problem here is our own reliability. That when systems used to break every day, then we got lots of practice responding to these things. Everyone was good at it because our airplane was a piece of junk. The problem now is the airplane is very good and it's reliable and it works all the time, and I get no practice at this. That is a real problem. So we're almost, by solving some problems, we're creating others here. What would it take to get drivers ready to respond in these situations and maintain those skills over long periods of time? I'm worried about this problem. Pilots, it's not going well. Of course, increasing system complexity. Oh, this is a really good one. The old airplane that I described, the manual is 686 pages. The new airplane, much simpler, of course, only needs 2 people to fly. The manual is 2,843 pages. Wow, okay, there's progress. We have made the book thicker. And there are fewer people to understand the book. Okay. Recent accident at San Francisco, the Asiana crash. 4 pilots sitting in the cockpit looking at this display right here, and no one noticed that the airspeed had deteriorated to the point where it was unrecoverable. And raising the question, how do we make systems that truly communicate what's going on to the crew? Very difficult problem from the perspective of aviation. We've suggested more training, but training costs money and it takes time. And our big question is, will drivers hit the books? Will drivers get those manuals out and study the Mercedes S-Class manual front to back? And maybe every 2 weeks get it out and study again and question each other and look at videos and talk about it. Pilots don't do this. Those 2,500 pages that we saw, you read it once in training, you take the test, and you do your best after that. So what will happen when the cars get very complex? So the last thing I worry about, a catch-22, hope you understand that phrase. Will we get to the point that the systems are so complex that they cannot be understood by one simple person? I think the airplanes are there. But yet the system still needs me. So I must still sometimes intervene and operate a system that I cannot understand. This worries me. I'm worried about a lot of things. So I ask, in summary, are you ready for this? Are cars and drivers ready to go on autopilot? Is it possible for a driver to remain attentive in a semi-automated car, in which it is needed for some things and not needed for other things? Will the system complexity alienate or just completely overwhelm the average driver? Will drivers study the owner's manuals? We just talked about that. Will the short time frames of driving expose us to risks that even I know nothing about in aviation because we have so much time? The one thing that we talked about last night, it could be the case that the simple automation that we have now will eliminate simple categories of accidents that alone will bring the accident rate down. That is the hope. Just by removing the accident caused by someone changing lanes when another car is there, or someone neglecting to brake in enough time or slow down, maybe the simple automation we have will just wipe out huge categories, huge numbers of accidents in those categories, and bring down the safety. The first graph I showed in aviation is that safety got better and better and better. Despite all the problems that I just complained about and all the pessimism that I've just delivered, the safety is getting better. How do we do that? Any questions?